The Education Listening Tour for Superintendent of Public Instruction Diane Douglas continues across the state.
When we want to make changes, it's important that we bring all people to the table. So this is just an opportunity to let people hear.
And election 2016 is underway in Arizona.
I think what we saw here was Kirkpatrick, is willing to make a bold move.
It's a potpourri of education, politics, and fire season. This is Arizona Week. Hello and welcome to Arizona Week. I'm Christopher Conover in for Lorraine Rivera. State Superintendent of Public Instruction Diane Douglas is on the road for a statewide listening tour. Her latest stop this week was Tucson.
I'm of the opinion that when we've made some very big changes to our education system, we did not hold the public hearings that I believe should have been held.
The 14-stop listening tour for Douglas is the public hearing she says never happened. It is also, as she said, a listening tour, a chance for people like high school teacher Kathy Sproul to speak and Douglas to listen.
High-stakes testing has done horrible things to education. It hasn't been proven to make anybody more college or career ready. In fact, from 2000 to 2010, by 2010, after 10 years of high-stakes testing, the achievement gap was even wider.
During the 2.5-hour meeting, Douglas did not give many answers to the audience. Afterwards, though, she did meet with members of the media.
We heard from a lot of teachers tonight that sounded kind of dejected about their profession, low teacher retention rates and low salaries. How do we keep more teachers in Arizona?
Well, I think that's an issue clearly that has to be addressed by the legislature. More funding never hurts. It's always nice to have more money to work with and make sure it gets into the classroom where it truly belongs. But I think some of the things we did here tonight and some of the things that are important, and one of the things I'll take away, and I have been through the course of, although it's not been that long that I've been in office, is that we need to celebrate the successes in Arizona. We have a lot of good things going on. We are the leader of the nation in many areas, in teacher training, in dealing with special needs children. I mean, I can't even begin to list them all. We're literally leading the nation, and we need to be celebrating those successes and spreading that word that, you know what, we really do have great education here in Arizona.
What do you say to the parents and teachers who see what's going on between the state board and the governor as bickering or distracting?
That's a matter of law. It needs to be resolved by the courts, and I'm going to focus, that's a tiny little bit of things. I focus on the children of Arizona every single day, and that is my number one priority.
So how does that benefit the children? What you need to go through?
Whenever we are a nation of laws, following laws are important and making sure that we adhere to them. So if that's some little lesson that our children take away from it, maybe that's not a bad thing, but the important thing is what goes on in the classroom every day, and that's where my focus is and remains.
Did you hear anything here in Tucson that you haven't heard on your previous stops?
Yes, I did, but please don't put me on the spot to mention it right now. Gosh, there were a couple of things that, as I took notes, that I just kind of had aha moments that I'm glad to, and I'll go back and review them. And a couple of suggestions. I thought the idea of maybe a newsletter or something that would put out some of our action items and things we're working on is a really great idea.
So just recently, I understand you voted no on revoking teaching certificates for those.
I absolutely support school safety and keeping the safest environment for our children. So we need to make sure we do that correctly.
Can you explain then that no vote on that, on the teaching certificates for the people convicted of sex crimes?
The incorrect certificates were in the board packet, so we really revoked nothing. We need to keep our children safe. We need to make sure that when we're dealing with people who shouldn't be in the classroom, that we do it correctly and we make sure they stay out. And these people are not in the classroom, nor have they been for a long time. So
it was
with
more
that,
like
let's talk about the tour.
Okay, I just had one other question that I have to ask. Some of your critics have said that you've put, politics before children, just in getting involved in lawsuits.
Has never happened. I always put children first. I have a young grandchild of my own, and that's him with the children of Arizona are the highest priority. Again, it's not politics, it's about the rule of law, and so it's not a distraction, though. We're going to make sure we always put children first.
So you ran on a platform of trying to eliminate the Common Core standards, and you did say tonight that as superintendent, you can't do that directly. So what can you do to reform and change the standards if that's still your intention?
We're going to take the feedback we get from the listening tour. I'm serving on the committee that's been formed to review the standards, so we'll bring all those things to the state board.
And so it's through the state board then that those changes would be made?
That's where the authority has been vested. Are we good?
Is there anything else you want to add that we didn't ask?
I just want to thank all the people who came out tonight. It was a great event. Every event has been great. They seem to be growing as we go along, so I'm very excited about that. And I would remind people that we will be back in the fall and that this is not a one-shot deal. I intend to do this as long as I'm superintendent. So look forward to seeing you again.
At the beginning of the week, Congresswoman Ann Kirkpatrick announced she's taking on John McCain in the race for U.S. Senate. We talked about it with Rebecca Sanders, who covers Congress for the Arizona Republic. Rebecca, here we are at the end of May 2015, and election 2016 is well underway in Arizona with Ann Kirkpatrick getting into the U.S. Senate race against John McCain.
We're off to the races already, and it's definitely shaking up the political landscape here in Arizona to have her announced for Senate, a big name Democrat to challenge McCain, and then leaving her House district wide open for both Democrats and Republicans to fight over.
Before we get to her House district, let's talk about her run. When members of Congress take on senators, often the knock is, well, the member of Congress is used to just running in a small district and the senator runs statewide, but Kirkpatrick's district, she's almost run statewide.
That's absolutely right. I mean, her district is larger than many states. It stretches from the Utah border, all the way down to suburbs of Tucson. And so it is enormous, and she is traveling that basically every time that she is back home from DC, and she's been traveling throughout that district now for many years as she has campaigned for that seat and also represented it as a state lawmaker and county attorney. So this, this is pretty known territory for her.
Some people categorize this as a surprise announcement when Congresswoman Kirkpatrick announced earlier this week. Did you see it as a surprise, or is this just part of the political game that we're playing?
Well, her name has definitely come up in conversations that I've had over the past year with political operatives about who might seek the Senate seat. But most eyes were on Congresswoman Kyrsten Sinema from Phoenix, who has a higher profile and is seen as being a little bit more politically ambitious. But I think what we saw here was Kirkpatrick, is willing to make a bold move, and she, has really shaken up the landscape here and established herself as this, Democratic fighter who's going to take on the lion in the Senate, John McCain.
Does this move by Kirkpatrick keep Sinema and other Democrats out of the race, or do you think this is just going to be the beginning of Democrats? Now the door is open.
This is a very big question. It definitely looks like it could box Sinema out of running, because you would think that if Sinema challenges Kirkpatrick in a primary, she could get blamed for kind of inciting, an inter-party battle and perhaps hurt Democrats' chances of going up against McCain. On the other hand, she does seem to have laid the groundwork in recent months for potentially making that jump, and to be kind of surprised by her colleague getting in before her. She might not just let that go. But on the other hand, if she stays in her House district, she has a lot of room to grow, and there could be many opportunities in the future for her to run for higher office if she kind of, cools her jets in 2016.
Let's talk about House districts. You and I both anxiously awaiting the U.S. Supreme Court decision, or maybe we're not anxiously awaiting it. It means a lot of work for us. On redistricting in Arizona, all these districts could change depending on what the U.S. Supreme Court says, so everything could be in play.
That's right. From now until the end of June, when the Supreme Court term ends, is the time that they're going to release a decision on whether Arizona's Independent Redistricting Commission will have the authority to draw districts or not. And if they rule against the commission, it means the Republican legislature will potentially redraw the 2016 map in a hurry in the fall. And that could just completely remake these districts, potentially putting incumbent members of Congress, outside of their current district, or reshaping a district like Cinemas that is pretty toss-up to leaning more Republican. And so it's really affecting the decision-making of pretty much any candidate for 2016, because if you don't know where you're running or your likelihood of winning, it's really hard to make that commitment to jump in now.
Let's talk about Congressional District 1, the one being vacated, for lack of a better term, by Ann Kirkpatrick. There are a lot of names that are popping up, people jumping in. Gary Keeney, who ran last time and made a pretty decent run in the Republican primary, was already in, but now other names starting to pop up.
It's a wide open field. There are a lot of people who are weighing this decision on both the left and the right. You've got everybody from, former House Speaker Andy Tobin, who ran last time, who's looking at a return to, the current House Speaker David Gowan, who is down from Sierra Vista, looking at that seat. You've got Pinal County Sheriff Paul Bagdashew, who also ran previously and might look to return. And then on the Democratic side, you've got people like Chris DeShaney, who made a name for himself last year when he ran in the Navajo presidential election. And you've got, people like Casey Clark, the Navajo County Sheriff, who also has been talked about as a top-tier candidate. So you've got a lot of people weighing this commitment to a congressional race. It really puts a lot of people on the spot to determine, whether they're going to be that ambitious.
We also even heard Representative Gosar. He already has a house in Flagstaff. He could just pop right back into that district and then leave District 4 open, which would then open the floodgates there also.
I mean, that could be a possibility, though it's hard for me to see him wanting to do that, simply because the district that he represents now, which is centered on Prescott, and the western part of the state is very safe Republican. And for any incumbent to go from a safe seat to a toss-up seat, it's against your own self-interest to do that.
All right, well, the fun of election 2016 in Arizona fully underway. Rebecca, thanks for sitting down with us.
Thanks for having me.
Arizona is seeing summer temperatures this week, and that means the unofficial start of wildfire season. Zach Ziegler sat down with fire managers to gauge what Arizona can expect.
Michelle Fiddler with the National Park Service and Heidi Schul with Coronado National Forest. Thank you for joining me today. And so we're a bit into the start of what is kind of traditionally fire season here in Arizona, but things have been fairly calm so far. Please tell me what's been going on.
Well, we have a lot of fuel that's available across the forests in southeastern Arizona. At the lower elevations, there's a lot of the grasses, quite tall in places. And then on up into the higher elevations, there also is vegetation that's drying out before it really should, because they didn't receive a lot of snowpack. So we do have the fuel that's available, but we've been having these little storms that have come through, and those have been buying us some time with cooler temperatures and higher relative humidity. So that's really something that when those cease and we see the heating and drying, that's when we'll see our fire danger increase.
All right. And we have kind of had these little periodic storms. What kind of effect has that had on things? Is this just a temporary Band-Aid, or is this going to have some effect on the fire season?
These little pulses of moisture have been pushing fire season back a bit. Again, it's still fire season year-round here in Arizona. Our concern this year is especially with the growth of the fine fuels, or the lighter vegetation, the grasses, especially some of our invasives like buffalo grass, are a concern because they're growing now while there's rain and it's moist. But as soon as it dries out later here this summer, those will be a continuous field bed that can carry fire. And so we're concerned about that as the season progresses.
How long does it take for a grass like that to start to dry out?
Those fine fuels are really lighter, and so it really doesn't take much at all. And so as soon as it gets hotter and drier, those will be a concern. Does
the weather make you concerned maybe that we're going to have some folks who say, oh, it's been raining lately, we don't need to be concerned with fire safety?
We really try to get the message across that you always need to be careful with fire, no matter what the weather is, no matter what time of year it is. We see wildfires happen every month out of the year on the Coronado National Forest anyway. So we try to encourage people to form good habits, be careful with fire no matter what the weather's doing. Things can influence ignition and the way a fire will burn that people don't even think about, such as wind, how hot it is, how dry the fuels are. So there's a lot of things that go into if a fire starts and how it burns. And so the best bet is to just really be careful all the time and make sure that you're not the cause of the next wildfire.
So we're starting to get to the time of year where people start to look for a little relief from the heat, maybe up in those sky islands. Is there a particular type of terrain, be it that high pine forest or the deserts, that's more in danger of sparking a fire than other parts?
Well, typically the lowlands will dry out more quickly and the grasses will become more available. And then normally, you know, the mountains will have snowpack and they will remain moister longer. So again, this year the snowpack didn't really materialize. We have seen a fire that had quite active fire behavior at 9,000 feet already occur. That's even with these storms that are coming through. So again, the finer fuels such as the grasses, they're going to respond much more quickly to environmental conditions such as heating and drying. But all elevations could potentially see wildfire this season.
And are there particular portions of the area that you look at and you see the most concern, or even just particular areas of your jurisdiction that really concern you?
Wildland-urban interface. A lot of the lower elevations are where dwellings, communities may be, and if we get fast-moving grass fires in those areas, especially wind-driven, that can really raise the concerns.
Our big concern is those human-caused fires, and again, those are more likely to occur where the people are. So along the roadsides, which again is in the grasses, those lighter fuels. So lesser-known things like dragging chains behind your car can create a spark, which can cause a wildfire. To doing things around your house, working in the yard, if the lawnmower strikes a rock, that can create a spark. And so just asking folks to keep in mind the simple things they do around the house. Every one less spark means one less wildfire.
And there's also that point of, if you do live in kind of that urban wild interface, of keeping your home fire defensible so that if a fire does spark, you don't have to worry as much.
Absolutely. With this beautiful weather that we've been having, this is the ideal opportunity to get out and do some projects around the house over the weekend. It doesn't take a lot. A few simple steps can really help you create that defensible space.
What is the message that you think is often most neglected that the public needs to know this time of year?
I think despite the precipitation, it's important to be prepared for fires. It's not a matter of if the fires occur, it's going to be a matter of when. So everything you can do now to prepare for the fire season ahead will pay off in the long run.
And again, also forming those good habits and always being careful with fire. When you're out, if it's a windy day and you don't need to have a fire, don't have one if you don't need it. Always make sure you build a fire in a safe place. Make sure the ground is devoid of anything flammable. If there is a metal fire pit or ring available at the place where you are, use that. Make sure that your fuel is cut down to size, that it doesn't protrude from whatever area that you are using to burn. Make sure there's no overhanging flammable material, and always make sure your fire is cold to the touch before you leave it for any reason.
As we're drawing to a close here, what are some of the final steps right now that crews on your lands are going through as they prepare for the season?
Well, we've got our additional firefighters. We bring them on in the leading edge of the fire season, get everybody trained up and qualified. Our engines are ready to roll, staged around the forest, and then we bring on a couple of contract helicopters that we stage at different locations so they are able to respond if a wildfire does start.
Heidi Schul with the Coronado National Forest, Michelle Fiddler with the National Park Service. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For more perspective on the wildfire season, Arizona Daily Star reporter Tom Beal joins us in the studio now. Tom, thanks so much for coming in.
No, you're welcome. Glad to be here.
You've covered fire seasons for many years. We hear a lot about the big fires. Are we seeing more big fires now than when you started doing this, or is this just our reporting?
Yeah, no, they're bigger. The first fires I covered were back in the 1980s. The 21 biggest fires in the Southwest have all occurred in this century. So, you know, up until the turn of this century, you didn't see a fire that was more than 50,000 acres. Rodeo Chetasky was sort of the first wake-up call, you know, about 400,000 acres, and we've had bigger fires since then. So they're getting bigger, they're getting hotter, and they're burning faster.
I know here in Tucson, for example, every time anybody sees a puff of smoke on Mount Lemmon, I think the county, the region collectively holds its breath. Public awareness seems to be a little higher too about fires and what they can do.
It is. It's, well, it is and it isn't. You know, the Aspen fire on Mount Lemmon was devastating in terms of the loss of property. That was 2003. But then just this year, a fire started in that same location, Carter Canyon, above Summer Haven, by someone who had lost 2 homes in that Aspen fire, who disposed of some fireplace ashes in his backyard and started a fire. So public awareness is there. Whether that's enough to keep us from starting fires and burning down the forest again, that may not be the case.
We just had the interview with Coronado National Forest folks, National Park folks, Zach Ziegler, a colleague, talking with them, talking about public awareness. We always hear the same message at this time of year from the forestry folks about not dumping your fire ashes and things like that. Is this a new thing looking back over since the 80s? Is this a new message, or is this a message that they've always been giving right about this time of year?
I think it's a ramped up version of an old message. You know, you've heard the campfire message forever. You know, only you can prevent forest fires, the whole Smokey the Bear thing. And, you know, people were always telling you, don't throw cigarette butts out the side of your car. This One Less Spark campaign that they're doing now is an iteration and a reiteration of some things that, you know, fire managers know that we may not so much. The fire, the 2,000-acre oak tree fire off of State Route 83, they believed was caused by a malfunction of a tire in a trailer. You know, you can cause a fire by dragging an unsecured chain from a trailer along the highway. You can do it with a lawnmower hitting a rock if you cut your grass too late in the season. So they're trying to get people aware of these things that start fires all the time. Welding is a big source of it. They're just trying to make people more aware of these other ways that you can start fire. Everybody always thinks of campfires, but it's easier than that to start a fire when things are as dry as they're going to be getting in the next month.
Being from the East Coast, we don't hear so much about prescribed burns on the East Coast as we do out here. Again, in your perspective, are prescribed burns a newer thing, or have these also always been going on? Maybe we just weren't aware of them quite so much.
Yeah, the Forest Service and the Park Service has been using prescribed burns for decades. I think they're ramping up whenever they can. Part of the problem is they don't really have a lot of money to do that. Most of their money is spent putting fires out. The federal agencies that fight fires, mainly the Forest Service and the Park Service, spend between $1 billion and $2 billion a year putting out fires. They spend a fraction of that preparing for prescribed burns and burning them when they have the opportunity. There's been a big call to ramp that up, and I think everybody's in agreement that that's what we have to do. We have to prepare places so that they don't burn as easily. But saying that, and diverting money, that $2 billion you use to fight fires, it'd be easy to say, let's use that to prepare for fires. Let's use that to prevent fires. But when you've got a fire going and houses in jeopardy and lives in jeopardy, nobody wants to make that calculus work.
Talking about lives in jeopardy, it was a couple of years ago we had the Yarnell Hill fire. We lost the Granite Mountain hotshots in that fire. First time in decades that we had lost firefighters at a wildland fire. Have things changed when it comes to wildland firefighting that you've seen since the incident at Yarnell Hill, or are we still working through that?
You know, I haven't been on a major fire since Yarnell. That was just, 2013. But I've talked to people who are in charge of protecting areas. I've talked to Larry Southard, the fire chief over in Oracle, and he was taking me around to these houses where people were spending a lot of time and effort getting them ready to be protected if a fire broke out. And he said to me, you know, after Yarnell, I don't know if they're going to let me station a truck here and try and save this house if a fire breaks out. You know, that message of, you know, deciding to save homes and jeopardizing lives is a very salient one. 19 people died. So they were careful before. I mean, the first rule in firefighting is always protection of the people who are fighting the fires and protection of lives, not property. You know, property is a secondary issue. But those guys, they get there and they do everything they can to protect property. They put their lives in danger. I think their managers are going to be riding herd on them a little bit stronger now to say, you know, don't do that. You know, if there's a hint of danger, get out of there. A house burns, so what?
All right, Tom, well, thanks for coming in and giving us your perspective.
Oh, thanks for inviting me.
And that's our show for this week. I'm Christopher Conover. Thanks for tuning in.